Okay, moving along to chapter 10 on interest groups and lobbying. As always, I want you to do the reading, but I definitely want you to take a peep at that insane amount of money that's spent on lobbying to influence policy outcomes in this country. Millions, millions, billions of dollars spent by interest groups and lobbyists in this country. The last figure I saw was something like there are 22 and a half lobbyists for every member of Congress. So if you go up to Congress, you think, oh, there's just going to be staffers coming and going. Here's a congressman. Here they go. Here's a senator. There's somebody from the House of Representatives or whatever. Negative. You are going to be inundated. You're going to be overwhelmed when you look down a corridor and you see lobbyists waiting to grab their favorite senator or their favorite congressman. It is a very interesting observation I've made on a couple of occasions when I had an opportunity to get up to the Capitol. I definitely recommend you go up there and take a look. DC's a good trip anyway, so lots of history, lots of cool stuff to see, regardless of your political affiliation and who's in office. You definitely should do that in your lifetime. So, this chapter, I believe, is broken down into 5 parts, and we're going to run through them real quick here. The first section breaks down interest groups, and it starts out by pointing out that political parties and interest groups both work together, but in different ways. Interest groups essentially work across political parties. So you have political parties that are, hard left, hard right, Republican or Democrat, whereas you have interest groups that are with, different interests, different causes that are going around trying to influence people on both sides of the aisle. So interest groups work across political parties. So what is an interest group? It's any formal, I should say formal, informal, it wouldn't be an organized interest group, but a formal association of individuals, organizations, pressure groups trying to get something done, or just an interest. Gun control is an interest. The NRA is an interest group. The NRA and lots of other organizations, private businesses, other governments, other countries, they have lobbyists. A lobbyist is a person who represents an organization before the government in an attempt to influence policy. They're whining, they're dining, they're giving the facts about their cause, they're tearing down the other side, whatever it is. They're a lobbyist. They're in the ear of the policymakers. Largely in this chapter, we're focusing on Congress here, so the House of Representatives and also the Senate. So what are membership organizations then? Well, those are a little bit different than just interest groups. Membership organizations are an interest group that usually consists of due-paying members. The NRA is a good example there. They are an interest group, but they're also a membership organization. Due-paying members, so they have due-paying members who organize around a particular cause or issue. You could have interests in the environment. The Sierra Club sells a membership. And so not every interest group is a membership, but not every membership is an interest group, if that makes any sense. I'm a member of the American Association of Economists. I'm sure they've lobbied at some point, but they don't really position themselves more as a interest group. They position themselves as a gathering place for economists. The NRA certainly is an interest group when it comes to gun rights, but they're also a membership organization. So there are a couple different types of lobbyists, really more than a couple, but these are simplified here. In-house lobbyist is an employee or an executive within an organization who works as a lobbyist on behalf of the organization. So their job, say for Michelin, their job for BMW, their job for GE, is to affect policy outcome, to influence it, to sell, if you will, their ideas as good policy. Whereas a contract lobbyist is a lobbyist who works for a contract lobbying firm that represents clients before the government. So a firm can either hire in-house and have someone lobby, or they can hire a contracting firm who then have people that all they do is lobby. So depending on the situation, one might be better over the other, but a contract lobbyist is essentially a third party lobbying on the behalf of an interest group, usually corporations. Legislative liaison is a person employed by the government, by a government entity, such as a local government, executive department, something like the USDA, something that comes through the president's purview, CDC, FDA, that type of thing, USDA. Um, they are the liaison between that interest, or it can even be a university, like a state-run university, to represent that organization before the legislature. So a legislative liaison is, again, a person employed by a government entity that's influencing legislation. Associations are groups of companies or institutions that organize around a common set of concerns, often within a given industry or trade. You'll see like an association of steelworkers. It might be a group of union steelworkers who look to influence policy that could affect the firm or affect labor law, that type of thing. Those are associations. You have inside and outside lobbying. We touched on this briefly with in-house lobbyists and contract lobbyists. But inside lobbying is the act of contacting and taking the organization's message directly to lawmakers in an attempt to influence policy. I've been a part of organizations that have done that. There's been a law that's come up that might help, say, or hurt, say, higher ed. And I've actually worked for a school, actually it was before I was at SMC, that they had us get together and, as a faculty, call our senators to say, hey, listen, we're real people and we don't like this law. It's going to affect, like, say, our private school, or it's going to affect our public school. It's going to do this. And you can have inside lobbying. You can have a phone bank where you incentivize your students to call, or you incentivize your teachers to call, or whatever. That's inside lobbying. Outside lobbying is the act of lobbying indirectly by taking the organization's message to the public, often through the use of media and or by issue of press releases in hopes that the public will then put pressure on lawmakers. So by inside lobbying is within the organization, you're going directly to the lawmakers. Outside lobbying is you're going to the public and you're wanting them to demand that their senators or their congressmen do something on their behalf. This is all, we'll talk a little bit more about grassroots movements, but a lot of grassroots movements start in the public sphere and utilize outside lobbying. Now, there's something called particularized benefits. It's a benefit that generally accrues to a narrow segment of society. Basically, one of the most wise people I've ever worked for told me, listen, when it comes to policy, and this was in business, so he was very aware of how legislative action can affect his business. He said, when it comes to policy, you're either at the table with the lawmakers or you're on the menu, meaning you're going to lose something. Particularized benefits means those that are more active, those are more aware, those are in there influencing, are going to have a certain set of benefits that only affects or benefits their narrow segment of society. That's why it's called particularized. Public interest groups, an interest group that seeks a public good, which is something that accrues to all. So a public interest group might lobby a local town council or something for a public park that everyone can use. There's something called collective goods. Collective means everyone. Goods means something, a product or a service. Is a good such as public safety or clean air. So all the air we share, if it's polluted, we have a collective problem. We have an externality is what that's called, like pollution. Collective goods are, like I say, a good like public safety or clean air. We all benefit from it. Okay, it's often produced by the government. It's generally available to the population as a whole, regardless if you can pay taxes or not. So keep that in mind. There are problems when we have collective action. What is collective action? Collective action are problems that occur when groups cannot work well together for whatever reason. One of those problems can be a free rider problem. It's a situation that occurs when individuals receive benefits and get a free ride without helping bear the cost. The classic free rider problem is, like I said before, a public park. So let's say you guys are at school at SMC, and that's in Spartanburg County, and you'd like to go down to a public park. And you pay zero property tax. Well, guess what? Property tax comes from, local property owners. So if you don't own any property in Spartanburg County, all right, if you don't own any property in Spartanburg County, you didn't pay property tax, you didn't pay for that park. But if you go and enjoy the park, I can't stop you. It's a public good. Now, deep down, I'm happy you're enjoying the park. But I did pay for the park and you didn't, as a landowner, as a property owner in Spartanburg County. If you go in there and start destroying the park, then that costs me more property taxes. That's the free rider problem. I can't capture your cost because it's a public good. So public goods suffer from a free rider problem. That's one of the collective action problems. Apathy is a collective action problem where people are happy just to let other people protest or other people influence policy or other people try to get funding for a school or etc. There are a couple different types of incentives, so they're not all problems. Material incentives are substantive monetary or physical benefits given to a group of members to help them overcome a collective action problem. So say you're having people saying, you know what, I'm not going to help you with this lobby, and I'm not going to help you. I'm going to steel union. I'm not going to help the steel union get what they want until I get a pay raise. So you're kind of saying, hey, what can you give me? You need a material incentive. Solidarity incentives, benefits based on the concept that people like to associate with those who are similar to them. Quite frankly, we tend to divide ourselves by demographics. I know growing up, churches are a good example of this. A lot of people go to church. It tends to be, oh, that's kind of the white people church, or oh, that's kind of the black people church. That's a solidarity incentive. People tend to gravitate to people who are similar to them. I know professors gravitate together because we have we have some common challenges. Republicans tend to congregate together. Democrats tend to congregate together. African American males tend to congregate together. Middle class white dudes tend to congregate together. NRA tends to be largely white. They have solidarity incentives. You tend to get together with groups of people who have similar demographics, similar beliefs. Look, the NRA is going to attract people that are pro-gun rights anyway, right? I mean, it's the National Riflemen's Association. Just like MAD, which is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, is going to naturally attract more mothers than fathers, and it's going to generally attract more people who have been impacted by drunk driving some way. So solidarity incentives is birds of a feather tend to flock together, if you know what I mean. Purposive incentives, benefits to overcome collective action problems. So these are benefits that are used to try to overcome like apathy or overcome free rider or overcome people looking for material incentives or overcome people who just want to hang out with people who are just like them. So there are benefits to overcome these collective action problems that appeal to people's support of the issue or cause. And I think we've seen a lot of, this is being recorded in the fall of 2020, and we're seeing a lot of protesting in terms of police brutality, protesting in terms of equality on racial grounds. And we're seeing a lot of purposive incentives where corporations, individuals, people that you wouldn't normally see coming out for this cause are actually coming out. So you're seeing a lot of white and Latino come out in support of Black Lives Matter. So you're seeing some purposive incentives that are actually leading people to collective action. Now, disturbance theory, we've seen that as well. That's the theory that an external event can lead to an interest group mobilization. So if you have a George Floyd, if you have a Breonna Taylor, all of these unfortunate instances we've had caused a disturbance. And the theory is here that disturbance theory opens what's called policy windows, and it moves people to collective action. They pick up a sign, they start calling their senators, they start calling their local Congress people, they start calling their local leaders, and they demand some changes. And so that's disturbance theory. It's called a policy window if you study advanced policy, and it's usually cracked open by some sort of disturbance. Third section, interest groups as political participation. There are a couple different types of movements here. Grassroots movements, a political movement that often begins from the bottom up, inspired by average citizens concerned with a given issue. So you can have someone who is a victim of police brutality, and it causes a local movement, say, in some city, and that causes... that catches the attention of local policymakers, and then that moves them to enact policies that remove, say, no-knock warrants. We saw this in Louisville with Breonna Taylor, unfortunately. That was a grassroots movement. That started at the bottom. It started with the people, and it ended up with a legislative change. Now, there can be other things, and this has been slipped into a lot of the political unrest that we have right now. and I just love this name, AstroTurf movement. So if you have grassroots movement, that's, kind of says like grass, but AstroTurf is fake grass, right? AstroTurf movement is a political movement that resembles a grassroots movement. It's meant to resemble a movement, like it's, the people's idea, but it's often supported and facilitated by wealthy interests or elites. So it's somebody's trying to get something done, but they want to make it like it's the people's idea, not theirs. So AstroTurf movement, this is one where we talk about the politicalization of interest groups, the politicalization of, say, Antifa, or the politicalization of Black Lives Matter, or the politicalization of, say, the NRA. That it's meant to look like, wow, the people really want this, but really it's the NRA that wants it, or really it's just George Soros, who's a billionaire on the left-hand side of the political spectrum. They were trying to influence things in terms of political influence. This can cause fragmentation. That's when that results when a large interest group develops diverging needs. So if someone's big interest is to get so-and-so elected and the other person is genuinely wanting to get no-knock warrants removed, it divides the interests of the interest group, for lack of better terms. So they have diverging needs, can cause fragmentation. It actually can cause the movement to lose a lot of steam. So you have to be careful of the old AstroTurf. Sometimes you can drag your toe and trip and fall. Sorry for the football analogy there. Efficacy is the belief that you can make a difference and that the government cares about you and your views. On the whole, I'd like to think that. I doubt very seriously a politician would look you right in the face and say they don't care about your needs and your views. I think they, on a certain level, they do, especially when it comes to getting reelected. But at the same time, they have to have incentives to care about your needs. It basically has to lead to, their continued presence in office, unfortunately, I think is a lot of the efficacy. Sorry, I don't mean to get down on you. But pluralist, a person who believes many groups healthily compete for the access of decision makers. I think there are many groups out there. I don't know how healthily they compete for the access to decision makers. One thing that comes up a lot, and can lead to fragmentation that we talked about before, is elite critique. It's the proposition that wealthy and elite interests are advantaged over those without resources. Listen, money talks in this game. If you have more money, you're going to get more ears. If you have less money, you're going to get less ears. If you get less money, you better get more organized and have more people, because more people is more votes, which allows them to then pursue more money. That is going to be a yin and yang. It has been a yin and yang since the beginning of this country. If you looked at Federalist Paper number 10, again, we talked about it the other week as well with James Madison, talking about interest groups, super PACs, that type of thing. We were talking about elections. The elites are very involved in influencing policy outcomes. Individuals with less resources, how they fight against this is organization. It's getting a number of votes, because no matter how many billions you have, you're one vote. But you can affect votes with billions of dollars. But at the end of the day, it's the people going in voting for the leaders that ultimately set the policy. Now, there's something called an iron triangle. It's a three-way relationship. So think of a triangle, three-way relationship among congressional committees that are churning out policy. Because you have Congress, they vote on everything, but they have these committees, these subcommittees, who focus on things like gun rights, who focus on things like abortion, who focus on things like international affairs. You have those committees in Congress. Then you have interest groups that want to affect those committees' outcomes. And then you have the bureaucracy, and that's who's going to execute things. So I'm trying to think of one with gun rights here. So you have a committee that's dealing with guns on school grounds, or guns among the mentally ill, or that type of thing. So they're trying to make policy related to those types of outcomes. You have interest groups like NRA, and then you have interest groups like a group of parents from some kids that got shot or something. It's awful, but they exist, that are looking to affect how that committee operates. We also have the bureaucracy that's going to say, okay, if we make this new rule about guns within a certain range of a schoolyard, how are you going to carry that out? So the ATF has to enforce that. FBI has to be involved. Local and all law enforcement as a bureaucracy has to be involved. So you have this three-way relationship. Congress sets the policy, which is influenced by interest groups, but it has to be executed by the bureaucracy. So you have to keep in mind that there are three sides to that triangle, and it's called an iron triangle. You can also have issue networks as a group of interest groups or people, or interest groups and people who work together to support a particular issue of policy. You don't necessarily have to be an NRA member of that interest group, of that membership organization, to be pro Second Amendment, pro gun rights. You can be in an issue network as a non-NRA member, pro Second Amendment, and care very deeply about the issue network without being a member of the NRA. So you can have an issue network around that. Neo-pluralist, like a pluralist, but new. Yeah, not really, kind of. Remember, a pluralist is a person who believes that many groups healthily compete for access to decision makers, while a neo-pluralist is a person who suggests that all groups' access and influence depend on the political environment. I think they're both right. I think there's a chance for healthy competition there, but I also think there have to be what we call policy windows, which we were talking about earlier with disturbance theory. Some stuff has to happen to get the policymakers' attention, to get them under the microscope. So if they're under the microscope, we talked about the media, they're going to be much more likely to act in a policy window due to disturbance theory. So neo-pluralists kind of observe that. Section 4, pathways to interest group influence. This is a very short section, so that's a very short part of my lecture notes. Again, so think back to PACs and super PACs in the election chapters. Interest groups contribute funds here. I'm going to jump down here for a second. Citizens United. Citizens United right here was a 2010, I'm going to do a little editing here for my printout, was a 2010 Supreme Court case. Okay? Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission in 2010 Supreme Court case that granted corporations and unions the right to spend unlimited amounts of money on elections. Remember super PACs? PACs, they're very limited. Corporations can contribute there. Super PACs can be created and corporations can contribute on an unlimited basis based on this Supreme Court outcome. So, think back to PACs and super PACs. Interest groups can contribute funds here. Voting queues. Sources including fellow lawmakers, constituents, and interest groups that lawmakers often use to help them decide how to vote, and especially on unfamiliar issues. I've seen this on a micro level. I'm on a lot of committees here at SMC, and there's a lot of times we're talking about things that we're not 100% familiar with, or we're not 100% sure which way to vote, or that type of thing. But have you ever been in a group? I mean, heck, buying a pizza. Have you ever been in a group where there's an idea and you don't really know how to react? You kind of look around and see how other people are reacting as well. Guess what? That's a voting cue. If someone says, you know what, I just want a cheese pizza. Okay, it's not that offensive. It's a cheese pizza. I'd prefer some pepperoni on there. But you kind of look around and people are like, yeah, I'll be fine with a cheese pizza. More people are probably more likely, or not probably, they are more likely to say, yeah, cheese pizza is fine if the first person that fires back is, yeah, cheese pizza is fine. If the first person says, dude, cheese pizza, that's lame. I want some pepperoni on there. Then you're much more likely to get a pepperoni pizza. That's a voting cue. Same thing happens in congressional committees. Same thing happens in academic committees here at SMC. First person that replies, people tend to fall in line. Unless the first person replies just completely off base. But that's some pathways to interest group influence. If you can have an interest group that gets involved in, say, a super PAC, or you have an interest group that can affect what that first reaction is, be it through the media, be it through dollar influence, be it through voices, enough voters calling in saying, hey, I'm not going to vote for you again if you vote for this. That's a voting cue. That's saying, hey, yeah, I better not vote for this. I just had 10,000 people call me and say don't vote for it. Free speech. Section 5, free speech and the regulation of interest groups. Guess what? Free speech applies to interest groups as well. They can say what they want. That's the First Amendment. There is something called soft money, money that interest groups can spend on behalf of candidates without being restricted by federal law. That came out of Citizens United, which we covered, and goes into super PACs, which we covered in the previous chapter on elections. And then lastly, we have something called revolving door laws. Laws that require a cooling off period before government officials can register to lobby after leaving office. So if you're a congressman for like 15 years, 20 years, if you're leaving political office, if you're an outgoing president, you can make a ton of money influencing policy right after you leave office because you know everybody. I mean, think about that. You have every connection in the world that you'd need to influence policy. The only thing is, federal law doesn't allow you to do that. You've got to have a cooling off period, and it's different for different positions. you can't work as a lobbyist for so many years because you need those connections to actually go stale. You need some people to move on, so you can't be so influential. You're changing everything even though you're not in office anymore. So that's called a revolving door law. They don't want you to come out of Congress and go right into lobbying. You can be a consultant, but you can't go lobbying to everybody you know because you just left the position. So that is one of the regulations on interest groups. Again, this wraps up our look at interest groups and lobbying. These again are my lecture notes that I normally would use in a normal class when we have plenty of time to write up on the board and go over everything in a less hurried manner. But I figured you'd appreciate me taking the cramp out of your hand and focusing on the learning of what we're doing here. So hope you've enjoyed our little chat on interest groups. I will see you on the next one.